Most men don't realize they're emotionally trapped until they're already too attached to leave. And when it comes to dating a single mother, the danger usually doesn't appear in the beginning. It appears slowly, through sacrifice, emotional pressure, divided priorities, and a loneliness most men never expected to feel inside a relationship. Today, we're going to talk about the hidden realities almost nobody warns men about until it's too late. A lot of men think they're entering a relationship when they date a single mother. But what they're really entering is a life that was already in motion long before they arrived. And most men don't realize how heavy that reality is until they're emotionally trapped inside it. At first, she feels different from other women. More mature, more grounded, less interested in games. She talks about loyalty, stability, peace. And after years of dealing with chaos in modern dating, that sounds exactly like the kind of woman a man should want. But slowly something changes. You start noticing that no matter how much effort you give, you're always adapting to a life that doesn't revolve around you. The schedule isn't yours. The emotional energy isn't fully available. The priorities were decided before you ever showed up. And little by little, many men begin to feel something they never expected to feel inside a relationship. Alone. Because this isn't just about love. It's about emotional weight, invisible sacrifices, and responsibilities most men never fully see until they're already deeply attached. And today, I want to show you the truths almost nobody warns men about before they step into this kind of situation. If you've ever dated a single mother or found yourself carrying emotional pressure that didn't originally belong to you, type "I learned the hard way" in the comments below. Because the men who get hurt the most are usually the ones who ignored the quiet warning signs in the beginning. One of the biggest mistakes men make when dating a single mother is assuming they're simply dating a woman who happens to have children. That sounds small in theory, but in reality, it changes the entire structure of the relationship. You're not entering an empty space where two people build a life together from the ground up. You're stepping into a system that already exists. The routines are already established. The emotional priorities are already assigned. The stress, the responsibilities, the unfinished wounds, the financial pressure, the parenting dynamics, all of it was there before you arrived. And at first, many men underestimate this because attraction clouds judgment. She feels emotionally safer than younger women, more appreciative, more serious. She tells you she's tired of games, tired of unstable men, tired of chaos. And for a man who wants peace, that sounds incredibly attractive. But what most men don't understand is that exhausted people often confuse stability with emotional availability. Those are not the same thing. A woman can genuinely want love while still being emotionally overloaded. And when a woman is overloaded, the relationship slowly becomes another responsibility she's trying to manage instead of a connection she has energy to nurture. That's when the emotional shift begins. You start out feeling chosen, then gradually you start feeling managed, scheduled, fitted into the empty spaces of someone else's already crowded life. And this is where many men begin to feel guilty for emotions they never expected to have. Because part of them starts wondering something they're almost afraid to admit out loud. Am I building a future here? Or am I helping someone survive the consequences of their past? That question changes everything. And the first painful reality most men run into after that is understanding exactly where they rank in her life. Now, let me say something clearly before we go any further. A good mother should put her children first. Any woman who abandons her children emotionally for a new man is not emotionally healthy. So, this is not about blaming women for loving their kids. That's not the issue. The issue is what that reality quietly does to the man in the relationship over time. Because many men enter these situations believing love will naturally create emotional balance. But eventually, they discover something difficult. No matter how loyal they are, no matter how much they provide, they will always exist below another emotional hierarchy they did not create. And at first, it seems manageable. Plans get cancelled because one of the kids is sick. She's emotionally drained after dealing with school issues, custody stress, or non-stop responsibilities. Conversations get interrupted. Intimacy becomes inconsistent. Your relationship slowly starts operating around exhaustion instead of connection. And men try to be understanding. Most genuinely do. But understanding something logically and feeling fulfilled emotionally are two very different things. This is why so many men slowly begin to feel emotionally invisible inside these relationships. Not abused, not betrayed, just emotionally unfed. You stop feeling like someone's partner and start feeling like emotional support staff inside a life that already belongs to other people. And the dangerous part is that many men silence their own needs because they feel guilty even having them. They think, she's doing her best. I shouldn't complain. So they suppress the loneliness. They suppress the resentment. They suppress the disappointment until one day they realize they haven't felt genuinely prioritized in months, maybe years. And that emotional starvation changes a man because men don't only stay where they are needed. They stay where they feel chosen. A man can tolerate pressure for a long time, but eventually every man reaches a breaking point when he feels like he's constantly receiving whatever emotional energy is left over after everyone else has already taken their piece. And the children are only part of the equation. Because there's another presence inside these relationships most men underestimate from the beginning. A lot of men believe they're only dating her, but the truth is, in most cases, there's another man whose presence never fully disappears from the relationship, even if he's no longer sleeping beside her, even if she claims she hates him, even if the relationship ended years ago. The father of her children is still connected to her life in ways you can never completely remove. And this creates a psychological tension many men struggle to explain out loud. If he's active in the children's lives, then his influence is constant. His schedule affects your schedule. His decisions affect your plans. His texts interrupt your evenings. Holidays, birthdays, emergencies, school events, another man's existence is permanently woven into the relationship you're trying to build. And no matter how mature you try to be, that dynamic wears on many men emotionally. Not because they're insecure, but because masculine energy naturally wants clarity, leadership, and emotional territory. It's difficult for many men to fully relax inside a situation where another man's shadow constantly shapes the environment around them. And if he's absent, that creates a different kind of tension. Now the questions begin. Why did the relationship collapse? Was he irresponsible from the beginning? Did she ignore obvious red flags? Did both of them create toxic conflict together? Was the chaos mutual? Because whether people admit it or not, a woman's past relationship choices reveal patterns about her emotional judgment. And here's the part most men discover too late. Even when she's emotionally over him romantically, she's rarely fully disconnected psychologically. They share history, trauma, memories, children, emotional scars, sometimes unresolved anger, sometimes unresolved attachment. The relationship may be dead, but the emotional footprint often survives long after the romance is gone. And over time, many men begin realizing they're not building something entirely new. They're trying to find stability inside emotional debris left behind by another relationship. And eventually, that pressure creates one of the most frustrating dynamics a man can experience. Because now, he's expected to carry responsibility inside a household where he still has very little real authority. This is the point where many men begin feeling trapped without fully understanding why. Because the role they slowly fall into is emotionally exhausting by design. You're expected to help, expected to contribute, expected to protect, expected to provide emotional stability inside the household. And if you truly care about the woman, you naturally want to step up. Most good men do. But here's where the tension begins. You are carrying responsibility inside a structure where you do not hold real authority. You are not the father, which means your influence always has limits. You can help raise the children, but your ability to correct behavior depends entirely on her approval. You can contribute financially, but major parenting decisions may still happen without your voice mattering. You can sacrifice your peace for the household, yet still be reminded during conflict that these are not your children. That contradiction slowly destroys many men psychologically, because masculine energy needs alignment between responsibility and authority. Men function best when the burdens they carry match the influence they possess. When those two things separate, resentment quietly begins growing underneath the relationship. And children sense this dynamic faster than adults realize. Kids are extremely sensitive to power structures inside a home. They quickly recognize when a man is expected to support the household but doesn't truly hold authority within it. Some children become resistant. Others test boundaries constantly. Others create emotional distance because they don't fully accept him as permanent. And the man ends up in an impossible position. If he becomes too involved, he's controlling. If he stays distant, he's cold. If he disciplines, he's overstepping. If he says nothing, he's weak or uninvolved. So many men spend years walking on emotional eggshells inside relationships where they can never fully relax. And eventually, exhaustion starts replacing love. Because there's a brutal psychological truth many men learn too late. A man can handle pressure far better than confusion. But when he's constantly expected to act like a father while simultaneously being reminded he isn't one, his emotional stability slowly begins collapsing from the inside out. And once emotional attachment deepens, another pressure usually begins appearing quietly in the background. Money, Most men don't walk into these relationships expecting to become providers. In the beginning, it rarely feels that serious. Maybe you help with dinner once in a while. Maybe you pay for small things. Maybe you step in during stressful moments because you care about her and the children. And honestly, none of that feels wrong. A good man naturally wants to help the people he loves. But emotional attachment changes financial boundaries faster than most men realize. Because once you become emotionally connected to someone's daily struggles, saying no starts feeling emotionally cruel. Now the child needs something important. School expenses appear. Emergencies happen. The cost of daily life keeps expanding. And slowly, without ever having a direct conversation about it, many men find themselves carrying financial pressure they never consciously agreed to carry. And what makes this dynamic psychologically dangerous is that the pressure is often indirect. Nobody explicitly says, you must provide. Instead, the guilt does the work. You see her overwhelmed. You see the children needing support. You see stress building around the household. And because you care, your instinct pushes you to solve problems. That's how many men are wired emotionally. But over time, something subtle begins happening inside him. He starts noticing that his resources, energy, and peace are flowing toward responsibilities he did not create. And if appreciation is missing, that sacrifice slowly transforms into quiet resentment. Because a man can willingly sacrifice for people he feels deeply connected to. But when sacrifice becomes expected instead of appreciated, love begins turning into emotional exhaustion. And this is where many men become trapped psychologically. If they pull back financially, they feel selfish. If they continue overextending themselves, they slowly lose their sense of freedom, control, and emotional balance. The fastest way to drain a man emotionally is to make him responsible for solving problems that were already there before he arrived. And eventually, after enough pressure builds, many men begin asking themselves a painful question they can no longer ignore. Am I loved for who I am or valued for what I can carry? This is usually the stage where resentment quietly enters the relationship. Not explosive anger, not screaming fights, just a slow emotional heaviness building underneath everything. And the reason is almost always the same. The man begins feeling like he's paying emotional consequences for choices he never made. He listens to her talk about wanting stability, maturity, loyalty, emotional intelligence, consistency. She says she's tired of toxic men, tired of chaos, tired of being hurt, and part of him understands that completely. But another part of him starts noticing something uncomfortable. The man who created the chaos often received access to her during her most emotionally open years. He received passion before the requirements became strict. He received children before stability became mandatory. Now the safe man arrives later and is expected to carry responsibilities the reckless man never had to carry. That realization creates a psychological conflict many men struggle to verbalize without sounding bitter. Because deep down, some men begin feeling like they were chosen for utility instead of desire. Not because she's intentionally manipulating them. Sometimes she genuinely believes she has matured and learned from painful experiences. Sometimes she truly wants peace now. But male psychology reacts very strongly to feeling emotionally transactional. A man wants to feel desired for who he is, not selected, because he's emotionally stable enough to repair damage left behind by another relationship. And once that perception enters his mind, the emotional energy shifts dramatically. He stops feeling special. He starts feeling practical, like a solution, like emotional insurance, like the responsible option after somebody else already experienced the exciting version of her. That feeling destroys attraction faster than most women realize. Because men can survive pressure, men can survive sacrifice. But many men emotionally shut down once they feel replaceable, interchangeable, or primarily valued for what they provide. Now, let me be fair here. Not every single mother creates this dynamic. Some are deeply appreciative. Some are emotionally accountable. Some genuinely build healthy relationships. But the pattern exists often enough that many men instinctively become cautious when they see it forming. And that caution becomes even stronger once men begin understanding how dating dynamics actually work beneath the surface. One of the biggest lies modern dating culture tells people is that emotions alone determine relationship outcomes. They don't. Feelings matter. Chemistry matters. Attraction matters. But long-term commitment is also deeply influenced by practicality, options, lifestyle compatibility, emotional cost, and perceived difficulty. And this is where many men start becoming brutally honest with themselves. A man who has options evaluates situations differently than a man who feels desperate for connection. That's just reality. When a man is emotionally stable, financially established, and capable of attracting different kinds of women, he naturally begins asking practical questions before committing his life to someone. How much peace will this relationship bring? How much pressure will it create? Will my life become simpler or heavier? And this is where single mothers face a difficult reality many people are afraid to say out loud. Even when the woman herself is attractive, kind, intelligent, and emotionally genuine, the situation around her still carries complications many men would rather avoid. The ex-partner, the divided priorities, the emotional baggage, the financial pressure, the lack of flexibility, the possibility of attachment without security. Men absolutely notice these things. Not because men are heartless, but because commitment always involves risk assessment, whether people admit it or not. And unfortunately, many women receive advice that completely ignores male psychology. They're told the right man won't care. But emotionally intelligent men do care. Responsible men evaluate consequences before stepping into situations that can permanently affect their peace, finances, and emotional stability. Love is emotional. Commitment is strategic. And the men who ignore strategy entirely often become the same men sitting alone years later wondering why they feel emotionally drained, financially burdened, and psychologically trapped inside relationships they entered blindly. Now, I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. Do men usually fall in love emotionally first? Or do they commit after evaluating whether the situation actually makes sense long term? Because understanding that difference explains why so many men hesitate the moment they see certain realities. And the biggest reality most men underestimate is not logistical. It's emotional. The deepest risk in these relationships is not money. It's attachment. Because over time, many men stop seeing the children as her kids. They become part of his emotional world too. He picks them up from school. He teaches them things. He helps with homework. He comforts them when they cry. He shows up for birthdays, dinners, small moments that slowly build emotional connection without him even realizing how attached he's becoming. And this is where many men get blindsided emotionally. Because if the relationship ends, those children usually disappear from his life overnight. No legal rights, no custody, no guaranteed contact. No protection for the emotional bond he spent years building. One breakup can erase an entire emotional world he invested himself into. And many men discover something painful in that moment. They're not only grieving the woman, they're grieving the loss of children they loved like family. That kind of emotional loss changes men deeply, especially because society rarely acknowledges it. People talk about the mother's pain, the children's pain, but very few people talk about the man who emotionally invested himself into a family structure he was never truly protected inside. And this is why experienced men become extremely cautious about emotional attachment in complicated relationships. Because once a man bonds emotionally, logic becomes weaker. Boundaries become weaker. His willingness to tolerate unhealthy dynamics increases because now he's terrified of losing people he genuinely loves. You can spend years pouring your energy, protection, guidance, and heart into a family that legally and emotionally can vanish from your life in a single conversation. And that's why entering this kind of relationship blindly is one of the most dangerous emotional decisions many men will ever make. But at the same time, I also need to say something important. Not every situation ends badly. Now, I don't want this conversation to become emotionally lazy or cynical, because not every relationship with a single mother is doomed. Some are genuinely healthy. Some become deeply loving partnerships. Some men step into these situations fully aware of the challenges and still build something meaningful. But the reason those relationships work is usually very different from what people assume. Healthy situations are built on realism, not fantasy. The woman is emotionally accountable. She doesn't minimize the complications. She respects the sacrifices being made instead of acting entitled to them. She has healthy boundaries with the father of her children. She's emotionally healed enough to stop dragging old trauma into new relationships. And equally important, the man enters the relationship intentionally. Not because he feels lonely, not because he thinks he can save her, not because he's afraid he can't attract anyone else. He chooses the situation with clear eyes. That changes everything. Older children also tend to create less emotional chaos than younger children. Less dependency, less constant crisis management, more room for an actual adult relationship to exist. And some men genuinely want family life, even if the children are not biologically theirs. For emotionally mature men with stable lives, the complications may not feel overwhelming because they are choosing companionship and emotional connection from a grounded place rather than emotional desperation. That distinction matters more than people realize, because complicated relationships only survive when both people stop pretending the situation is simple. Love alone is never enough to overcome denial. Awareness matters. Boundaries matter. Emotional maturity matters. And before any man commits himself fully to this kind of relationship, there are a few truths he absolutely must be honest enough to face. Before a man commits himself to a relationship like this, he needs to stop listening to fantasy and start paying attention to patterns. Because many men don't enter complicated relationships logically. They enter emotionally, and emotions are very good at making temporary feelings look permanent. So, the first thing a man needs to ask himself is brutally simple. Am I choosing this woman specifically, or am I choosing the opportunity to not be alone? That question matters more than most men realize because loneliness makes men tolerate situations they would normally walk away from. Fear lowers standards quietly. A man who secretly doubts his own value often convinces himself he should just accept emotional conditions that don't truly make him happy. And that almost always becomes resentment later. The second thing he must examine honestly is her relationship history and emotional patterns. Not to shame her, not to punish her, but to understand what kind of emotional environment he's stepping into. Does she take accountability for her past choices? Does she constantly blame everyone else? Does she create peace or constant emotional turbulence? How does she handle conflict? How does she speak about the father of her children when emotions rise? Because unresolved emotional chaos always leaks into new relationships eventually. Third, never ignore your hesitation. Men often feel warning signs long before they can explain them logically. The body notices emotional imbalance before the mind fully organizes it into words. That quiet discomfort many men feel at the beginning is not always insecurity. Sometimes it's pattern recognition. And finally, protect yourself emotionally, financially, psychologically. Do not rush cohabitation. Do not overextend yourself financially out of guilt. Do not hand over emotional leadership just because you feel sympathy for someone's difficult circumstances. A compassionate man without boundaries becomes easy to drain. And one of the most important things you should watch carefully is her attitude toward your sacrifice. A woman who truly respects your effort behaves very differently from a woman who simply expects it. Gratitude creates connection. Entitlement destroys it. Because at the end of the day, most men are not destroyed by women. They are destroyed by stepping into situations they never fully understood until it was too late to leave without losing pieces of themselves. And that is the real trap most men never see coming. The truth is, this conversation was never really about single mothers. It was about awareness. Because many men enter relationships believing love will automatically erase pressure, complications, emotional baggage, or structural imbalance. But relationships don't work that way. Attraction can make a situation feel exciting in the beginning, yet reality always reveals itself over time. And the men who suffer the most are usually not the weakest men. They're often the most compassionate ones. The men who try to help. The men who try to understand. The men who silence their own emotional needs because they don't want to seem selfish or unkind. But there's a difference between being loving and abandoning yourself emotionally. A strong man does not ignore reality just because he feels emotionally attached. He asks difficult questions before he sacrifices years of his peace, finances, emotional stability, and future for a situation he may never truly feel secure inside. That doesn't mean every relationship with a single mother is doomed. Some become beautiful partnerships built on honesty, maturity, and mutual respect. But blind emotional investment is dangerous in any relationship, especially when the emotional structure was already complicated before you arrived. The danger is not loving a woman with children. The danger is stepping into a life you never fully understood until you were already emotionally trapped inside it. So, if this video spoke to something you've experienced personally, leave your thoughts in the comments.